Yo everybody, what's going on? This is Keegan from Kman Reviews. If you enjoy this review, make sure you hit that like and the subscribe button, and if you have any opinions at all that you would like to share, make sure to leave them down in the comment section. Bladee, Gluee. Bladee is a Swedish rapper, singer, songwriter, producer, multi-talented artist, and CEO of the collective Drain Gang, developing a massive underground cult fanbase through the usage of an enigmatic presence online and a discography so wrapped in experimentation that labeling him to any sole genre is kind of impossible, and why I've seen so many fans just say he is his own genre. Bladee existed in the same part of my expertise that Radiohead did for the longest time, where I know some of the big hits. In Blade's case, I know a little bit more thanks to some friends, but I've never had that experience of listening to a full Bladee project until I got the request to check out the debut, his first mixtape, Gluee, released in 2014. As I did my research, I got a little bit worried to fully dive into this one first because I heard from several different people that Gluee is probably one of the most polarizing things in Blade's catalog. You either love it or you hate it. It's got plenty of acclaim, but it's also got its fair share of haters, so I got this hunch that Gluee didn't seem like the best place to start with Blade's discography. But anyway, let's just dive right in. What are my thoughts on Gluee? Let's find out as I review it track by track. Since I couldn't find if there were actually any singles, we will just start at the top of the track list, with that being Deletee parentheses intro, one of the songs I was actually familiar with from Bladee, and I love this one. Starting off with this deep, looming synth wall that very slowly begins to build as the vocals come in, absolutely coated in autotune. I don't hate autotune as much as the average person does, and normally I feel like it would just ruin any song, but the way it's intertwined and how some of the melodies bounce off the beat perfectly, it works so well. There's a hissing snare and shaking bass that comes in a little after a minute in, and a very prominent ticking hi-hat a little over 2 minutes in, and both of them create very subtle grooves. Not necessarily a banging track by any means, but these moments are definitely enough to get a few heads nodding. Lyrically, it contains your typical rap tropes, but also indicates to how lonely and distant he is, both in terms of relationships and in the public eye period. Great song. Safehouse is just so much fun. This track always manages to put me in a good mood. It's poppy, lively, exciting, honestly my favorite jam on this entire mixtape. I absolutely adore this beat. The plunky and beeping synths, these woodwind accompaniments, that rumbling bass, the percussion is so smoothly implemented and changes several times from your same old trap drum to a bit more of an authentic kit, and even to just popping bass. The rhythm of this one never gets boring, and Blade's melodies are so simple and work amazingly. On its surface, his flow is slow and trotting, but the way he matches with the bass and the synths, it's a match made in heaven, as these lyrics continue to list off the same topics, describing his riches and using the term Safehouse to paint his isolated lifestyle. Amazing song. eBay, featuring Drain Gang affiliates Tyboy Digital and Echo 2K, opens up with this almost siren-like synth that kind of instinctively lets me know that this is probably going to be a banger, and it certainly is in comparison to the other tracks so far. The percussion is the hardest it's been yet, the crashing snare is thunderous, the bass just quakes under the mix, making the whole song feel much heavier than it should with these components. Bladee and Tyboy both delivered decent enough verses, not anything mind-blowing at all, but still very competent. But at least for me, Echo 2K steals the show here. That verse is so fluid, and he just makes it seem effortless. Such a fun bop of a tune. Shadowface featuring Bones is really just pure uncut vibe. This instrumental is just buttery smooth. I love the combination of the guttural bass as its foundation and some higher pitched keys to create this giant bubble of a mix that you just can't really escape from, and the skittering trap drum almost functions as the melody in front of this sheer smothering ambience. But the aforementioned vibe could only be possible with the performances, and Blade's slow delivery being garnished with every effect ever is hypnotizing. And while Bones picks things up a little bit in his verse, he still perfectly fits the mold, as these lyrics seem to deviate from the flexing riches side and dive headfirst into feelings of loneliness due to failures in a past relationship, coping with drugs and expensive purchases. A very enjoyable song. Spellbound is one of the sleeper hits off this mixtape. The instrumental isn't as layered or as suffocating as it has been. In fact, it's pretty tame. Sure, the hi-hat is as prominent as ever and is even more sharp, but the synths are mostly reserved, painting a minimal groove with the bubbly arpeggios and soft beeping melodies. But honestly, it's Bladee's ability to easily ride a beat of this nature that's really been selling a lot of these tracks for me, and this one is no exception. His flow, his delivery, his cadence, it's also spellbinding, as the title would suggest. Lyrically, it's right back to money, this time just being enamored with it and knowing he can buy all these luxuries that will at least bring him some kind of joy. Nice track. Everlasting Flames featuring Tyboy Digital is probably the one track on this mixtape that I'm not all that jazzed about. There are elements to it that are nice. I like the luscious, icy synths. Blade and Tyboy do a really good job over this beat, and the vibe overall is solid, but there's definitely pieces here that don't quite work for me, like the lightning fast hi-hat being more distracting than enjoyable. Admittedly, it doesn't show up all the time, but when it does, I think it's more of a hindrance. Tyboy's verse is honestly like an oasis in this song. His deep voice over the twinkling beat, it's warm and satisfying, and in comparison it does kind of put on display Blade's vocal inexperience at this time. I know he's had unimpressive vocals prior to this, but this was the first one that really stuck out for me. Speaking of Tyboy, I would have loved for him to have a little bit more presence here, maybe over one of the choruses or something. As it stands though, it's alright, but I think there are much better on here. Freeze brings us right back with a pretty solid banger. Much like Spellbound, the beat is pretty light and airy in terms of its synths, really only there to provide an ethereal ambience, but it's really this groovy percussion courtesy of that rattling hi-hat, smashing snare, and tiptoeing of the bass just to give the track a slight bounce. Blade's vocals are surprisingly inconsistent, but not in a bad way, but whatever kind of mastering happened caused his voice to sometimes get quieter and fade into this instrumental briefly, most noticeable on the early first verse. It's not really too big of a problem here, especially since the vocal melody is just so damn good anyway. Lyrically, more standard for this mixtape, flexing, being unable to love, but I do like the usage of freeze here, how he's calling himself divine as he walks on water to make it freeze, seeing a vision of his beloved in the water, but being unable to actually reach out to it. Great song. Upgrade Enabled is easily the slowest track on this mixtape, but I really enjoy this one. The twinkling crystalline synths paired with this looming punchy bass and hollow taps of the percussion, it's a very comforting and appealing beat as Blade raps with a strong robotic effect on his voice, which I'm not sure was the most appropriate effect to use, but it certainly wasn't the worst out there. I do think that this can become a little bit tedious to sit through over many consecutive listens like I had to do for this review, but in the context of this mixtape and where it's placed, I think it's a really solid addition. And finally, the closer, Unreal, the shortest track on this mixtape, and yeah, this is definitely just a closing track. It's got the most scant structure out of any song here, one verse and a brief outro refrain, but in that short amount of time, this track just becomes such a trip. Chiptune staccato synths, a frail hissing of the snare, very minute hi-hat. But Blade's vocals are kind of the main attraction here. Not in that they're prominent, but kind of the opposite actually. They almost morph with this beat combined with a reverb vocal effect. It's just such a trance of a song. I don't think this mixtape could have really ended in any other way, but I do think this one's a little bit too much for me personally. Overall, for a first-time Blade experience, I'm surprised with how much I enjoyed this, especially being in his older material. A lot of captivating vibes here, mesmerizing beats, sticky melodies. I understand why a lot of people hold this mixtape up. One of the biggest critiques I've heard for this tape is the amateurish vocals being a little bit of a nuisance, and sure, while in some songs they can be irritating, they didn't really get to me for the most part. For those of you who don't know, I am a pop listener, we can ignore mediocre vocals as long as it has a good melody. Anyway, aside from that, I really enjoyed this tape. Definitely gonna have to jump into Blade a bit more going forward. I'm feeling a 7.5 out of 10 on this mixtape. Well guys, hope you enjoyed that review. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.